Wait until Emmett comes. A preacher was riding to one of the churches on his circuit when darkness fell. It was about to storm, and the only house nearby was an old mansion which was reputed to be haunted. The preacher clutched his Bible and said, "The Lord will take care of me." He went into the mansion just as the storm broke. He put his horse into the barn and made his way into the house. The door was unlocked. He went into a large room which contained a fireplace that filled one wall. There was wood laid for a fire. He laid a match to it. Then the preacher sat down to read his Bible. Gradually, the fire burned down to a heap of coals as the storm howled around the mansion. The preacher was roused from his reading by a sound. He looked up from his Bible. A very large, black cat was stretching itself. Then it walked to the fire and sat down among the red-hot coals. It picked a coal up in its paw and licked it slowly. The cat got up, shook the ashes, and walked to the foot of the preacher's chair. It fixed blazing yellow eyes upon him, black tail lashing, and said quietly, "Wait until Emmett comes." The preacher jumped from Genesis to Matthew in shock. He had never heard of a cat talking before. Nervously, he kept reading his Bible, muttering to himself, "The Lord will take care of me." 2 minutes later, another cat came into the room. It was black as midnight and as large as the biggest dog. It lay down among the red-hot coals, lazily batting them with enormous paws. Then it walked over to the other cat and said, "What shall we do with him?" The first cat replied, "We should not do anything until Emmett comes." The two cats, black as midnight, sat watching the preacher, who read through the Gospels at top speed, aware of blazing yellow eyes watching him. A third cat, big as a tiger, entered the room. It went to the fire full of red-hot coals and rolled among them, chewing them and spitting them out. Then it came to the other two cats facing the preacher in the chair. "What shall we do with him?" it growled to the others. "We should not do anything until Emmett comes," the other cats replied together. The preacher flipped to Revelation, looking furtively around the room. He closed the Bible and stood up. "Good night, cats. I is glad of your company, but when Emmett comes, you done tell him I been here and went. Never mind them watermelons." Well now, old Sam Gibb, he didn't believe in ghosts. Not one bit. Everyone in town knew the old log cabin back in the woods was haunted, but Sam Gibb just laughed whenever folks talked about it. Finally, the blacksmith dared Sam Gibb to spend the night in the haunted log cabin. If he stayed there until dawn, the blacksmith would buy him a whole cartload of watermelons. Sam was delighted. Watermelon was Sam's absolute favorite fruit. He accepted the dare at once, packed some matches in his pipe, and went right over to the log cabin to spend the night. Sam went into the old log cabin, started a fire, lit his pipe, and settled into a rickety old chair with yesterday's newspaper. As he was reading, he heard a creaking sound. Looking up, he saw that a gnarled little creature with glowing red eyes had taken the seat beside him. It had a long, forked tail, 2 horns on its head, claws at the ends of its hands, and sharp teeth that poked right through its large lips. "There ain't nobody here tonight except you and me," the creature said to old Sam Gibb. It had a voice like the hiss of flames. Sam's heart nearly stopped with fright. He leapt to his feet. "There ain't going to be nobody here but you in a minute," Sam Gibb told the gnarled creature. He leapt straight for the nearest exit, which happened to be the window, and hightailed it down the lane lickety-split. He ran so fast he overtook 2 rabbits being chased by a coyote. But it wasn't long before he heard the pounding of little hooves, and the gnarled creature with the red eyes caught up with him. "You're making pretty good speed for an old man," said the creature to old Sam Gibb. "Oh, I can run much faster than this," Sam Gibb told it. He took off like a bolt of lightning, leaving the gnarled creature in the dust. As he ran past the smithy, the blacksmith came flying out of the forge to see what was wrong. "Never mind about them watermelons," Sam Gibb shouted to the blacksmith without breaking his stride. Old Sam Gibb ran all the way home and hid under his bed for the rest of the night. After that, he was a firm believer in ghosts and spooks, and he refused to go anywhere near the old cabin in the woods. Heartbeat. Something was going on. Jason felt it in his bones. Polly was too happy, too cheerful. No woman could be that upbeat and still be faithful to her husband. Jason sat down to a delicious, warm meal every night, and Polly sang to herself as she washed up. What kind of woman could be cheerful doing dishes? Try as he might, Jason never heard anything that hinted of a secret romance. It drove him crazy. Life was not this perfect. Maybe Polly was seeing the milkman or the grocer. Jason started getting up early in order to see who it was that delivered the milk. Much to his disappointment, the fellow looked as if he'd been born several centuries ago. Then Jason started doing the food shopping and checked out every single male employee in the local grocery store. They were either antediluvian relicts like the milkman or still in diapers. Later that month, Jason was over at his father-in-law's house working in the garage when he overheard his father-in-law call to Hank, Polly's high school boyfriend. Now he knew. He knew why Polly was so happy all the time. Her parents must have told her that Hank was coming home and she was planning on running off with him. Enraged with jealousy, Jason was waiting in the kitchen when Polly got back from church. He was beyond reason. He snatched up a newly sharpened steak knife, howling, "You've cut out my heart, now I'll cut out yours." Jason leapt around the table and ripped Polly's still beating heart out of her chest. Blood streaming everywhere, he sailed out the back door into the dark night and flung her heart, still thumping, over the side of the bridge that spanned the creek next to their home. Jason cleaned up the blood-stained house with extreme care and buried Polly's body deep in the woods outside of town. Then he wrote several letters, carefully mimicking Polly's handwriting, and mailed them to himself and her parents. Within a few days, everyone in town believed that Polly had been secretly seeing a man from the next town and that they had run away together. Late one evening, he went out to the bridge to gloat and triumph over his unfaithful wife. Polly had gotten what she deserved, he thought. As he stood staring down at the water, he became aware of a vibration under his feet. Da-dum. 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 It floated softly through the air, a simple rhythmic thudding. Da-dum. 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 Jason's hands began to tingle as he recognized the soft thudding sound. It was the same beat he had felt when he held Polly's bleeding heart in his hands. Da-dum. 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 The heartbeat rang in his ears, thundering so loud that he was afraid it would wake the neighbors. Da-dum. 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 Jason clapped his hands over his ears and ran back to the house. But he could not escape the terrible sound. Da-dum. 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 Even the floorboards seemed to vibrate to the slow, steady rhythm. Da-dum. 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 It sounded like a heartbeat. Polly's heartbeat. Da-dum. 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 Jason screamed in terror and flung himself out of the house, running toward the bridge as the heartbeat grew louder and louder in his ears. Jason leaned over the railing. "Curse you, Polly," he shouted. Da-dum. 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 With a wild shriek, Jason flung himself headfirst off the bridge like a diver and was smashed to death on the rocks below. Underfoot on the bridge, the pavement still vibrates to the beat of a dead heart. For now and always. Da-dum. 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 Henry Hudson and the Catskill Gnomes. On September 3rd of 1609, Henry Hudson sailed the Half Moon into the mouth of the great New York River that later bore his name. The explorer and his crew journeyed north for several days, trading with the native residents and searching for the fabled Northwest Passage to the Orient. By the time he reached the area that would become present-day Albany, Hudson knew that he had not found the passage for which he sought. Reluctantly, he turned the half moon and sailed back down the river. That night, Henry Hudson and his crew anchored the half moon in the shadow of the Catskill Mountains. Around midnight, Hudson heard the sound of music floating across the mountains and down to the river. Taking a few members of his crew, he went ashore and followed the sound up and up into the Catskills. The sound of the music grew louder as Hudson and his men marched up to the edge of a precipice. To their astonishment, a group of pygmies with long, bushy beards and eyes like pigs were dancing and singing and capering about in the firelight. Hudson realized that these creatures were the metalworking gnomes of whom the natives had spoken. One of the bushy-bearded chaps spotted the explorer and his men and welcomed them with a cheer. The short men surrounded the crew and drew them into the firelight and the dance. Hudson and his men were delighted with these strange, small creatures and with the hard liquor that the gnomes had brewed. Long into the night, the men drank and played ninepins with the gnomes while Henry Hudson sipped at a single glass of spirits and spoke with the chief of the gnomes about many deep and mysterious things. Realizing at last how late it was, Hudson looked around for his men. At first, he couldn't locate them. All he saw were large groups of gnomes, laughing and joking as they sprawled around the fire. Then, to his astonishment, he recognized several of the gnomes as his crewmen. They had undergone a transformation. Their heads had swollen to twice their normal size, their eyes were small and pig-like, and their bodies had shortened until they were only a little taller than the gnomes themselves. Hudson was alarmed and asked the chief of the gnomes for an explanation. The chief explained to Hudson the effect of the magical hard liquor the gnomes brewed. It would wear off when the liquor did. Hudson wasn't sure that he believed the little man. Afraid of what else might happen to him and his crewmen if they continued to linger in such company, Hudson hurriedly took his leave of the gnomes and hustled his severely drunken crewmen back to the half moon. The entire crew slept late into the morning as if they were under the influence of a sleeping draught. When they awakened, the crewmen who had accompanied Hudson up into the Catskill Mountains, aside from ferocious headaches, were back to normal. Hudson continued on his way down the Great River, and by October 4th, the half moon had reached the mouth and Hudson and his crew sailed for home. In 1610, Hudson set off on another journey, searching for a northwestern passage to the Orient. Trapped in the ice through a long winter, Hudson's crew eventually mutinied and set Henry Hudson and 8 of his crewmen adrift in the Hudson Bay. They were never seen again. In September 1629, 20 years to the day that Hudson and his crew met the Catskill Gnomes, a bright fire appeared on the precipice above the hollow, and dance music could be heard floating through the mountains. The Catskill Gnomes spent the evening dancing and carousing and drinking their magic liquor. At midnight, they were joined by the spirits of Henry Hudson and crew. Merry was their meeting, and the gnomes and the spirits played ninepins all night long. Each time they rolled the ball, a peal of thunder would shake the mountains, and the fire would flare up in bolts like lightning. The party lasted until daybreak, at which hour the spirits departed from the hills, with promises to return. Every 20 years, the spirits of Henry Hudson and his crew returned to the Catskill Mountains to play ninepins with the gnomes and to look out over the country they had first explored together on the half moon. Now and then, one of the Dutch settlers living in the region came across the spirits as they played ninepins. They claimed that any man foolish enough to drink of the spirits' magic liquor would sleep from the moment the spirits departed the mountain to the day they returned, 20 years later. Most folks discounted the story, although several members of Rip Van Winkle's family swore it was true. True or false, wise folks who walk among the Catskills in September do not accept a drink of liquor when it is offered to them. Just in case. Hold him, Tab. Yep, I remember what it was like before the railroad came through these parts. I used to earn my living by carting supplies from town to town on horse-drawn wagons. Not easy work, no sir. Especially in winter. One cold December day, I was traveling with my buddy Tab when it began to snow. Gee willikers, it was cold. We needed to find shelter quick, and I was delighted when I spotted an abandoned house. We thought we were real lucky, finding such a good shelter. As we unhitched the horses, a fellow stopped by to talk to us. Claimed he was the owner of the property. Told us we were welcome to stay, but the house was haunted. The owner said that no one who had ever stayed in that house had made it out alive. That was good enough for me. I hitched old Betsy back up to the wagon and moved up the road to a stand of trees that offered some shelter from the snow. Tab said he wasn't afraid of no ghosts, and he didn't plan on perishing in the snow. I wasn't about to risk my neck in a haunted house. I built a fire as best I could and waited through the long night, wondering a couple of times if Tab wasn't the smart one. Well, just about dawn, I gave up trying to sleep and went back down the road to see how Tab had fared for the night. I peeked through the windows on the first floor. I saw Tab snoozing peacefully in a big bed. He looked warm and happy. Then I saw movement on the ceiling. I looked up, and there was a large man dressed all in white, floating flat against the ceiling. The man was right over Tab, looking down on him. "Tab," I hissed, tapping at the window. "Tab, get out of there, you fool." Tab woke, but instead of looking toward the window, he looked straight up and saw the man on the ceiling. Tab gave an awful yell, but before he could move out of bed, that man fell and landed right on top of him. Now Tab was a big, strong fellow, but that ghost was powerful. They wrestled back and forth on the bed. I gave a shout and smashed the glass in the window, shouting, "Hold him, Tab, hold him." Just then, the ghost flung himself and Tab right at me, knocking me back out of the window and into the snow. The ghost levitated himself and Tab onto the roof of the front porch. I kept shouting, "Hold him, Tab, hold him." The ghost and Tab were wrestling frantically on the porch roof. The ghost gave a mighty leap and threw Tab onto the roof of the house. "Hold him, Tab," I shouted. "Hold him." Then the ghost lifted Tab right into the air. "I got him," Tab cried. "But he got me too." They were floating a few feet off the roof, still grappling with each other. And then the ghost carried Tab straight up into the air and they vanished. I never saw Tab again. I know moonrise. Mama told me I should never to walk along the Marsh shortcut that led from our plantation to the town of Brunswick. She said it was dangerous and I'd get myself killed if I didn't listen to her. That didn't make any sense. The Marsh shortcut was a wide, sandy path that my buddies used all the time when they went to the store in town. None of them ever got hurt. And at the age of 13, I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. It was Pa who told me why Mama was so scared of the marsh path. Pa said, "Your Mama's little sister disappeared in the marsh a long time ago. She was taking the shortcut to the old pond to gather some firewood, and she never came back. They found her straw hat floating in the stagnant water, but they never found her body." "I ain't gonna fall into the water like Mama's sister," I protested. "That ain't it, son," Pa said. "It's the spirit of your little aunt. She comes to the marsh path some evenings and she sings." Color drained from my face and my arms grew goose-fleshed. "She's a ghost?" I gasped. "Not just a ghost, son," Pa said. "Your little aunt, she's kind of like the jack-o'-lantern. After she drowned, her ghost started floating over the marsh at night, singing softly of death and the grave. She's lonesome and wants her family to join her, so she tries to lure them into the water with her song." Pa swallowed hard and continued, "It's safe for your buddies to walk that path 'cause they ain't family. But if you go there, the ghost will come fare you. So you stay away from the marsh." It was easy to forget the ghost in the long days of summer as the fellers and I rambled around the countryside after the day's work was done. One day, my buddy Jimmy and I were caught in Brunswick after sunset. "My pa's going to be sore at me if I miss dinner," Jimmy said. "We better hurry." Jimmy swerved onto the shortcut through the marsh, expecting me to follow. I stared after my buddy, torn between speed and safety. I knew I shouldn't take the shortcut, but with Jimmy present, chances were good that the ghost wouldn't come because he wasn't family. I raced down the marsh path after Jimmy. As the wind swished through the marsh grasses, all whisper, 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 I paused for a moment to admire the moon, which was rising over the treetops, making a glittering path across the still water. Suddenly, the air around me grew cold until my whole body shook with chills. Out of the silvery moon sparkle, there came a childlike figure that danced and floated above the dark water like a will-o-wisp. I gasped, my throat tight with fear. I called to Jimmy, just a yard in front of me, but he didn't hear me, and I knew he couldn't see the spirit floating toward us across the marsh. Puffs of freezing air formed in front of my nostrils as the little girl started to sing. I know moonrise, I know starrise, lay this body down. I walk into moonlight, I walk into starlight, to lay this body down. I'll walk into graveyard, I'll walk through the graveyard, to lay this body down. I'll lie in the grave and stretch out my arms, lay this body down. I relaxed suddenly as lovely pictures floated through my head. I saw myself as a grown man, and I had become rich and famous. I had a fancy house and an expensive car and a lovely family. Then I saw my mama right in front of me. She was beaming with pride over my achievements. She beckoned to me, wanted me to come give her a hug. I hurried forward, splashing through water that came to my knees, my waist, my chest. "I'm coming, Mama," I called, stretching strangely heavy arms toward her. Then I was overwhelmed by the stink of stagnant marsh gases. My mouth filled with sour water, and I choked as the world went dark. I woke gasping as someone pounded me on the chest. I choked and vomited swamp water all over the person thumping my ribs. Then I heard Pa's voice, "Son? You all right? Son?" I opened my eyes and saw Jimmy and my Pa staring down at me in the shimmering moonlight. It was Jimmy that pulled me out of the swamp, and Pa that forced air back into my lungs. I was soaked to the skin, and my whole body trembled with cold and shock. "I saw Mama's little sister," I gasped. She sang to me. Then I lost consciousness again. When I woke the second time, I was in my bed and Mama was holding my hand and weeping. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and scolded me something fierce for disobeying her. I promised her then and there that I wouldn't walk the marsh path again, and I kept that promise. And ever after, I could never listen to anyone singing the song "I Know Moonlight." It made me feel sick to hear it.